My name is Andy, and I'm a depressive. Hi, Andy. Okay, my understanding is that's what happens at Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. You stand up and you say, my name is so-and-so, and I'm an alcoholic, and everyone responds by saying, hi, whatever your name is. A lot of people have asked me how I conquered or came to terms with depression when I had a debilitating, crushing depression about a quarter of a century ago, maybe a little bit less than that, but round about then. I don't really have a way to answer that question because depression is a gigantic thing, a multifaceted thing, and an utterly elusive thing. And not only that, when you do develop your own strategy for coping with the fact that you're going to be a depressive your entire life in the same way as an alcoholic has to, or in most cases, I guess, has to admit that they're an alcoholic and they're always going to be one. I believe that a depressive of my type, whatever that is, has to admit to themselves that they are a depressive and bear that in mind at all times. In other words, when you look at yourself in the mirror every morning, you have to say, I'm a depressive. But again, when the alcoholic says, I'm an alcoholic, he's saying, or she is saying essentially, I'm an alcoholic, but I don't want alcohol to rule my life today. I don't want alcohol, I don't want to fall prey to alcohol today because for me it's dangerous. And in a sense, all that really means is you're coming to terms with the fact that it's going to be a dominating factor in your life. It's going to be perhaps the dominating factor in your life, which is something that anyone with a mood disorder will tell you they do not want to be true, and they will do anything to avoid that truth in their life. I won't really say that this advice is of any use to anyone, but enough people have asked me, how did you overcome your depression and become smiling Andy? Well, I don't go on the camera and start blabbing away when I feel depressed. To me, it's a personal thing. And it's not so much that I don't want anyone else to know, it's just that the techniques that I've evolved are personal, and they may be inexpressible. In many ways, it's overcoming a mood disorder is a never-ending mind game with yourself as the opponent. Something in you, or in me at least, in my case, strangely wants to be depressed, is seduced by depression. I think that's why I find H.P. Lovecraft and that sort of thing, Stephen King even, so seductive, because the darkness has an enormous seductive power over me. A little bit of that is pretty good. And I recognize the fact that indulging in this is not quite the same thing as indulging in depression. There's healthy darkness, there's good darkness, and then there's toxic darkness, and distinguishing between the two is not always easy. And that, to me, has been one of the ways in which I've overcome depression, is being able to distinguish between healthy darkness and toxic darkness. Anyone watching my series on antinatalism and depression will obviously realize that I've identified, for me at least, and perhaps for some other people, that antinatalism is toxic darkness. It's not a healthy philosophy if you want to get beyond depression. But I can't really offer any advice or even any serious explanations as to how I deal with the depression, other than understanding that that monkey is going to be on my shoulder for the rest of my life and every hour of the day waiting to strike me, the same way as an alcoholic has to deal with the temptation of bars everywhere and liquor stores everywhere and a culture that seems to emphasize drinking. There's a lot of negativity out there. In spite of the fact that we all think that the universe or the world that we live in, the society we live in, is absurdly positive, there's a lot of negativity out there. And that seductive power of the negativity, the seductive power of the toxic negativity, is always going to be before my eyes. I won't say that I've reached the rock bottom of the depths of depression, but I believe that in terms of my ability to imagine it, I was very close. I was at a point where I believed that suicide was futile to deal with depression. And that'll tell you, that's pretty low. But I don't feel that way now. And it's hard for me to imagine what it was like. And sometimes I have to jog my memory a bit to say, oh yeah, there it is. Okay, haha, I'm still on the straight and narrow here. I'm still dealing with the fact that that's just there ready to leap on my back and start tearing at me again and tearing me to pieces, destroying my soul, as it were. And also, a lot of the mind games that I indulge in with myself as the opponent really wouldn't make any sense if I attempted to describe them to anyone else, and in a sense would cheapen them if I spoke about them. A lot of people who don't say fuck a lot don't really avoid it because it's not appropriate language. It's just that when they want to have a good, harsh swear word, they keep fuck in reserve. Because if you say fuck every second word, you've cheapened it. You've lessened its power. And I find that if I try and discuss my depressive state with anyone but someone who is listening to me for precisely the purpose of assisting me in playing the games with myself, i.e. someone who's either a therapist or who is, I'm not in therapy and I haven't been in 20 years, but I can have conversations with myself, as it were, as though I'm talking to a therapist. Or I can talk to someone whom I trust about the illness, someone who's actually been there, and that the subject of the conversation is in real time, and we can trade thoughts, trade points of view on the illness. But if you talk about it too much, if you talk about your experiences with it, if you talk about your coping mechanisms with it too much, with someone who is just curious, it has a cheapening effect in the same way that fuck becomes cheapened if you use it too often. So it's not so much that I find that my experiences with depression are private, too private to be shared. It's just that depression is such a central issue in my life that I don't want to cheapen it by getting into a discussion with it. Just that starts to sound, in my mind at least, too academic. Again, a lot of people have asked me, and I'm not really reticent to discuss this sort of thing, but it's just that, and my life is not ruled by depression, but I know that it could be. So I have to sort of always be on my guard against anything that might actually lead me down the path towards depression, but without being weakened by that vigilance. It's a very fine line to tread. My life, I don't think, when I breathe my last, I don't think I'm going to say that my life has been wrecked by depression. In some bizarre kind of way, it may have actually been improved by it, because the worst struck me very early in my life, and then I recovered. Now, if you've come out of depression, if you're a person that's recovered from depression, it's the only possible comparison I should think would be someone who has been reborn. Life has begun again. Everything has started again, and you've got a new lease on life. And especially, I think, if that happens when you're still relatively young. If this strikes you with all its force early in life, and still relatively early in life you overcome it, or I wouldn't say you overcome it, but you come to terms with it and you manage to yoke it and control it, the rest of your life starts to look really good. But I do get enough in the way of flashbacks to sort of remind me that it's still there. But in a sense, it's a strange thing, and again, it's part of the mind games thing. The very fact that I know that it's just there waiting to leap and destroy me and tear me to pieces has the paradoxical and bizarre effect of improving my day-to-day life. And again, because of the fact that I constantly remind myself that I am depressed, I'm sort of, as it were, every time that I'm not depressed, every time that I'm myself, when I'm smiling Andy, I'm recharging my batteries. So once or twice a year, it does strike again, and I end up on the couch for a few days. But because of the fact that I was conscious of this, and again, people don't want to remember that they were ever depressed when they're not depressed. But because I do try to remind myself of it, the batteries are recharged to the point where the positive energy is still at least visible while I'm prostrate on the couch. It's hard to explain, but I do take the positivity and I deliberately store it up. And then when I am prostrated by depression, I can at least lay there and think, oh my God, this is beyond horrible. But the horrific clarity of it is, in a sense, combated by the fact that the positive side of my character has been speaking for a very long time to the negative side and saying, this too shall pass. Beyond that, I don't really have any advice to offer anybody, or any other way to explain my struggle with depression. And I believe so far it's been a highly successful one. How do you pull this off? How do you do it? The only advice I would ever give anyone is remember how strong it is and how it is actually a part of you, and it always will be. Even in the good times, especially in the good times, remember. My name is Andy, and I'm a depressive. Hi, Andy. Do that every day. In a sense, I do. And it works for me. For what that's worth. Thank you.